right, I make videos of all these things. There will be videos of everything on the website, so you don't need to attend class at the official time, even remotely. You can just view videos later if you want to. But the first thing we're going to do is the first couple of chapters here, which are labeled 0 and 1. So here we are. So, all right, so malware analysis is a relatively demanding activity, and we should talk about the goal. So here's an example. I had a student of mine, went out and became an IT consultant and was working for people. So a medical clinic hired him and said, there's malware on the workstation. So he cleaned and re-imaged the machine, and they say, you're done. And he called me and said, I don't think I'm done. And I say, you're right, you're not done. If that happens, and there's medical data, you have to ask some questions like, did it spread? Did it infect other machines? Did the criminals that put that malware on use it to gain control of other servers? Are you sure they're gone? And if that's all the customer wants, I would at least have a written letter you can point to later saying, I think more work needs to be done here so that if there's a disaster, you won't be blamed for it. But I mean, that's right. You're not done. This is the problem. Normal IT problems, like a hard drive crashes, you have standard techniques. They just replace the hard drive, re-image it or something. But that's not good enough with malware infections and with hacker intrusions. You have to research them more. So these are the questions everybody has. Did an attacker put remote control software on the machines? Are they really gone? What did they steal, and how did they get in? We haven't really dealt with this incident until we figured out what damage they did and fixed it, and we figured out how they get in and close that door. And that is not easy. All right, so LinkedIn did this. LinkedIn was hacked about 10 years ago, and the attacker found their hashed passwords and cracked most of them, but some of them they couldn't crack, and they posted it on a cybercrime forum where you could see them. And LinkedIn said, we didn't get hacked, that stuff is fake. Well, I went on there, and I found my password. And I said, dude, that's my real password. LinkedIn got hacked, and a bunch of other security professionals said the same thing. And LinkedIn continued to say, oh, no, it's just fake for about a week. And then they admitted, okay, we got hacked, but we asked our lawyers, and our lawyers say we don't have to do anything, so we're just going to do nothing about it. And I was like, you can't just ignore it. You can't say criminals are in control of our network, but we don't care. And it turned out you can't ignore it. They ended up having to pay $1 million and upgrade things and pay fines and all that jazz. You can't just ignore it when criminals are wandering through your network stealing stuff. So one step here is to understand your malware. What you're trying to figure out is how it works, how to identify it so you can tell which machines are infected, and then how to fix it. So what you want to respond to an intrusion, you want to know what happened. You want to make sure you found all the machines that are part of the compromise, figure out how to contain the damage and detect it, and find signatures for your intrusion detection system and your other analysis systems so you can tell what's going on. It's not easy, and it often takes several attempts to get it right. So signatures are what you're looking for here, which are essentially called indicators of compromise. An indicator of compromise is something you can easily detect that tells you this machine has been part of the attack, like a registry key or a file or network connection it makes. So you try to figure out what it did, and network signatures are very handy. If it actually has a kind of network traffic it produces, then you can just measure that at your egress point and detect all the machines that are infected by which ones are sending traffic to that server. So that's nice when you have that. One problem is you tend to have false positives. This happened to City College. There was a big scandal here a few years ago. A crooked consultant, we had a crooked chief technology officer who had a partner who was a crooked IT consultant, and he had gone from college to college having fake virus outbreaks and paying the consultant a lot of money to clean off the fake viruses that weren't there. And so he claimed he was routing all network traffic back through his server, where he was analyzing it with his secret proprietary tool that found all the viruses that we couldn't find. And he claimed that he found 200 Windows viruses on our Linux DNS servers. And I think I know what was going on. What you can do is you can get a list of all the IP addresses that are being used as command and control centers by botnets. And I think he took any machine that sent any traffic to those servers, he interpreted them as infected. But they aren't. For example, if you get a spam email, the email protection system will often send a request back to the sender of that email to verify that it's really the right source. So you will be sending data back to the source of it, but that doesn't mean you're infected. It means you had some traffic from that source and you had some kind of response. That doesn't necessarily mean you're infected. But anyway, this is an issue. If you don't have good indicators of compromise, you will falsely accuse your machines of being infected when they aren't. So When I first heard of malware analysis, the only technique I knew was to print out all the assembly code and read it and figure it out. And that is one way to do it, but that is a lot of work and very difficult. And what has happened, I took a workshop from a European agency on this several years ago, and I was very pleased to observe there are now much better tools available. There are tools that make it much easier. Sometimes you really have to do that. Just read all the assembly code, but that's your last resort because it's very difficult. There are two basic techniques, static and dynamic analysis. Static analysis analyzes the code without running it. Now, you can use VirusTotal to see if it's already been identified by somebody else and analyzed. You can run strings to just get all the readable strings out of the malware where you don't have to read the code. And if necessary, then you disassemble it down to the assembly code and read it. You can do all that without running it. But dynamic analysis is extremely powerful and easy and fun. You start a virtual machine and you deliberately infect it with the malware. And while it's running, you run a bunch of tools to monitor what's happening on the operating system. Now, I was horrified when I heard of this because, of course, you're running the tools on the compromised machine. So you cannot really trust what the tools put out. But this is the thing I needed to learn, is that the same thing's true of police when they're investigating crime. Sometimes the bad guys are sneaky and they hide from your detection techniques, and none of your detection techniques are perfect. So you just have to get over it. You use a technique even knowing it's not perfect, and that's why you need to know a lot of tools and techniques, because often one will fail and you just try another. But most of the malware is not that smart, just like most of the crooks are not that smart, and a simple technique is good enough to find it. So just running tools like Process Monitor and Process Explorer and Wireshark on an infected machine will give you reliable information about what that malware is doing, and that's pretty easy. So basic static analysis is viewing the malware without trying to read the code. So you look at strings or you go to VirusTotal. This is quick and easy, but it's not very powerful. Dynamic analysis is also pretty easy. You run it and just see what it does. Again, that's fast and easy, but not terribly effective if the malware is sneakier. For example, Android malware is smart enough to know if it's running in a virtual machine. You have to have a real Android device or your Android malware won't run. However, most Windows malware is stupid enough to run in a virtual machine. And so advanced static analysis is where you actually reverse engineer it with a disassembler and read the code. And advanced dynamic analysis is where you run the code in a debugger so you can put in breakpoints and run only part of it. And so this advanced static is the most difficult. Like what I was saying, that's the only technique I knew, and that's why I thought this is essentially impossible. The other techniques are all easier. And so we're going to go through all these techniques, but we'll put advanced static at the end so you learn what you should do, which is you try the easy techniques first, and you only use the hard technique when you have to. All right, so there's lots of malware out there. Backdoors give the attacker remote control of a system. Botnets have a bunch of computers controlled from one central location. Downloaders are there commonly used to one stage of malware that downloads another stage. And a lot of malware is there to steal information like cryptocurrency keys and passwords and such. Launchers are programs that launch another program. And rootkits are the most dangerous kind of malware that infect the kernel of the operating system typically, although there are some userland rootkits. The point of rootkits is that they are always there, they're difficult to detect, difficult to remove, and they survive reboots and most attempts to clean them. Scareware is one that scares the user into buying something. There was a guy that had this pop-up come up in his browser. His browser got malware, and it popped up and said, "You've got child porn." And he did have child porn. He might have turned himself into the FBI. But you know, there's lots of things that try to scare you into doing something. There's malware that sends spam email. There's worms and viruses that spread through instant messages and such. And of course, the big one everyone's afraid of, ransomware. Infect your machine, encrypt all your files, encrypt all your network-connected files, and then demand a ransom. This is really big. Everyone's very worried about it these days. So mass malware is where many people have exactly the same file. That's the most common type. A targeted attack is usually not what most people have, unless you're a big important company or a political figure or something. People usually won't waste time specifically targeting you, but if they do, it's much more difficult to catch it because it's not standard malware. They modified it. This is what pen testers do. They have a specific target against one company, and a good pen tester has a success rate of 100%. You can always get in. If you focus your attention on one company or one person and you try hard enough, the most essential part of this is you have to come up with an email that will fool them. You have to analyze their life or their company and find out what will make them emotional so they'll click on the link. So at City College, you'd send an email saying we're having another round of layoffs, or we're closing a parking lot, or something that will really be a problem, and then people will open that PDF or whatever you put in there saying, oh my God, what bad thing are they doing to me now? That's the kind of thing. Stuxnet, for example, was targeted. We wanted to stop the Iranian nuclear program, so in cooperation with Israel, we made special malware just to infect their devices, and it was so sneaky, it worked. It infected their devices and broke them, and they couldn't figure out for a long time what had happened. But that's a lot of work. So unless somebody is willing to invest a lot of work in attacking you, you're probably just going to get mass malware. All right. Anyway, so general rules are, don't waste your time in details. If some tool is not working and it's sending you down a rabbit hole of trying more and more complicated things, then just go on to another technique. Don't waste too much time, because sometimes the malware specifically is designed to confuse your tool. So, and you don't need to understand 100% of the code. You're not trying to write a PhD thesis on this malware. You're trying to just figure out how to detect it and how to clean it off. You don't really need to know everything. Try several tools and be aware that everything keeps changing. All malware authors keep coming up with new techniques, so there's never going to be one simple solution. We're dealing with active criminals, so the criminals keep improving their techniques, so the defenders have to keep improving their techniques. So let's try Kahoot. These are optional online quizzes you can take just for some extra credit. If you get in the top 3, you'll get 3 points. And it serves mostly to stop people from falling asleep during a lecture. So let me see if I'm getting in. This is 126. Looks like I did get in. All right. Now, finally, after years, they finally have sorting. So it's easier to find the right one, and there it is, 1A. All right. So go to kahoot.it and put in that number, and I'll move this so that you can see it in the Zoom, and my face is not cutting off the last digit. In the Twitch. All right, which technique requires deliberately infecting a computer? Yep, that's dynamic analysis. All right. All right, what technique can find many infected computers with a single point of measurement? Network test. You measure the network traffic at one point, you can see all the machines that are infected. This is why companies love DNS analysis. You can look at the DNS requests and you can tell what everybody is doing. If they're going to games or porn sites or anything, you can see who went there by just studying the DNS requests. All right. All right. Which one involves running part of the malicious code and then stopping the code at breakpoints? That's debugging. Very fun technique. We'll do a lot of projects in that. It's used to cheat on Windows games, among other things. All right. All right. What kind of malware spreads to other systems? Yep, they're worms. They spread to other systems. These other things might just sit on one system. All right, what kind of malware conceals other code? That's rootkits. I didn't mention it, but that's one thing. Rootkits conceal files, network connections, running processes. The most powerful rootkit is the blue pill from Joanna Ruczkowska in Poland that turns your machine into a virtual machine, so other processes are happening that your machine can't detect anymore. All right. All right, SW. I think we know who SW is from last semester, but I'm not sure. If you use a fake name, you have a chance we won't figure out who you are to give you your points, so you might want to put a message in Canvas or something to make sure. Couldn't join Kahoot. Didn't use more than a year. Well, that's strange. You should be able to. When we get to the next one, let me know how it goes. Everyone should be able to join unless there's some kind of block on your network. It's just kahoot.it. I'll put it here. That's all you should need to get in, but there may be some kind of problem on your network. That's part of why it's worth extra credit. You don't have to do it. It's optional. Some people don't like to do it anyway. All right, so anyway, let's talk about static analysis. The simplest technique, basic static analysis. You feed it into an antivirus engine, you take the hash and feed it into a list like virus total, or you look at things you can easily tell from a file like the strings, functions, and headers. These are easily to extract from an executable without running it. So my virus total is your main first stop here. It's a Google product. It has all the signatures from a whole bunch of antivirus engines. So you can upload a file and it will analyze it. However, that is not considered a good practice because it might be that your malware is not a mass malware that's identical on many systems. And some attackers will modify their file to send each person a different file, and then they watch virus total, and when it goes to virus total, they know they've been found out. So it reveals your investigation, and that's a failure for operational security. So what's better is to take a hash value and search for the hash value, because that does not add anything to the database at virus total. That just finds out if the file is known without handing the file over to a public resource where people will know you caught them. And that's what hashing are. So you can make hashes are just a way to boil a file down to a small fingerprint, MD5, SHA-1 or SHA-2 or various hashing techniques. And this is the way you can then search for it. In principle, the best one to use is SHA-2. These others have a very small chance of two files having the same hash, but in practice that is so rare that you really don't have to worry about it, not for this purpose. So HashCalc is a Windows tool I used to use for this. It's gone, by the way. Now I just use PowerShell. You can calculate hashes right in PowerShell on Windows. Anyway, all right. So once you have a hash, you can search for the hash online to see if other people have identified the file, virus total, and other resources. Anybody that analyzes malware will typically put the hash in their write-up just for this reason. So if you just Google a hash, you'll find out what people have to say about that file. All right, and then strings is extremely powerful. you just go through the file and look for any series of printable characters. ASCII characters are only 8 bits long, and they're only use the first 7 bits, and only printable characters only go from like 32 to 127, something like that. So there's a less than 50% chance that a random byte is going to be printable. So if you look for ones that are, say, 6 characters or more long, those are usually real printable strings. Now, sometimes they're random code that just looks like strings, but most of them are printable strings. So just a series of printable strings, you print them all out, and most of them are going to be messages that you can read. One dirty trick, though, is Microsoft uses Unicode, and they use a very, very old version of Unicode because Microsoft has been an international language since about 1993. It's been an international operating system. So they use this 16-bit form of Unicode that uses 16 bits for every character, and therefore it adds a null byte after every normal ASCII byte. That's why modern Unicode uses UTF-8, which is much more efficient than this, but Microsoft uses the really old one, so you must also search for Unicode strings, and tools like bintext, which we're going to use, will do that for you. Anyway, the strings command is native in Linux. That's one way to do it. You can also download it as a command line command on Windows. That's one way to get the strings. And then you run strings on the file, and then you'll see stuff like this. Like here's a couple of random things that just happen to look like strings. Here's an IP address. Here's a couple of Windows API calls. These are Windows API calls. This is a Windows library. Here's some kind of error message. That's what you get. You get a lot of some junk, but you get things that are easy to read, so you get a pretty good idea what the malware is doing without bothering to read the code. And bintext is just a graphical tool that does the same thing. And so here you see this header is every Microsoft Windows program cannot be run in DOS mode. Here's the sections of code which we're going to go through. Here's some more Microsoft libraries that are called. All right, so that's the sort of thing. All right. Now, if you don't want people reading the strings in your malware, then you can pack it or obfuscate it. Packed malware is just compressed, like a self-extracting zip file. So the original executable is here with strings that are visible. It's compressed, which hides the strings, and then it has a little wrapper program that will unpack it when you run it. So this makes it smaller, and it also means that a simple tool like strings won't do you much good anymore. All you'll see is the strings in the wrapper program. All right, so you can detect packers with another tool called PEID. This will just try to identify what kind of file it is, and if it has been packed with a common well-known packer, it will tell you that, like UPX is a common packer, and PEID will tell you if this thing has been packed with UPX. So, and UPX is just a command line tool. We'll use it in the projects. You can use it to pack a file or to unpack a file. So if you're fortunate enough to find that they've used a standard open source packer, then it's easy to unpack. We will also show how to unpack custom packers. You can do it easily in a debugger. And so here's, if you look at the strings in this file chatty and count them, it found 1,900 strings. And here's the packed one, right here, up here, a word count, right? This is the number of lines or something. Here's the number of strings, 33,000 strings, 23,000. I'm not seeing, oh yeah, here's the original one has 33,000 strings. The packed one only has 23,000 strings. It's hidden a lot of the strings, which is the point of it. All right, by the way, here's an important fact. Even if you're doing something you think is safe, always work in a virtual machine when you're working with malware. Some of these tools will run the malware and it's not obvious. Like PEID can have plugins that will run the malware. This has happened to me before. I've worked with PHP malware and I tried to run it thinking I'd blocked the malicious part, and I had not successfully stopped it at the malicious part. So whenever you're working with malware, you work in a disposable virtual machine, because you really can't be sure that any of the tools you use aren't going to run the malware. So you should be working in a safe environment whenever you do this. So the portable executable file format is the first bit of Windows internals that you need to learn. All Microsoft executables are called portable executable files, and these are both the executable files and the DILs, the libraries. This is the code structure, and it has a standard header. Every file executed on Windows is in PE format. So it has a header, which is information about the code and the libraries and the space requirements, so the Windows operating system can figure out how to load that file into memory and run it. It has to take various segments and put them in memory. So LordPE is one tool that will let you see. You can go to an executable and you can load into a PE editor, and then you'll see the sections here. And here's the main sections: text, data, resource, and relocation section. And it shows you how big they are. And we're going to play with these a lot. You'll get used to these. They're segments in a PE file. So the main sections you always have a text section. That contains the executable code. And you always have a data section, and you may have others. But you can have as many as you want, but there's certain ones you almost always see, and you're going to get very used to watching these sections as we go ahead in the projects. So let's try another Kahoot. Created an encoder decoder. Good, glad to hear it. You're on the path. So here's the Kahoot 1B. Now a student said they could not join the Kahoot. Let's see if you can get on this one. All you should have to do is open a browser and go to kahoot.it. Although, as students say, there is an app you can load too, on your phone or something. All you should need is this kahoot.it and that PIN number when you get there. So I can see the chat over here in this room. That's nice. I have a second screen I can use. So Ahmet, let me know if you can get in. Maybe we can debug the problem. But there are always strange problems, and sometimes have trouble solving them. A lot of students have network blocks and stuff. For a class I taught here, they blocked my website on campus. Stuff like that happens. QR code, yeah, that's true. There's a QR code, might be a QR code for Kahoot too. These are all good ideas people are suggesting. Looks like you got in. I see Ahmet. I hope you got in. Good. All right, so what technique mathematically calculates a number to uniquely identify a file? And that's hashing, good. I see Honeybee with a question about 121. I don't think it's on Twitch as well. Might be on Zoom or something, but you'll have to contact Richard Wu to find out. All right, what technique finds the readable text in a file? Those are strings, good. All right, so what file type has a header specifying things like text, data, and resource? All right, that's a portable executable. And if you want to be picky, all of these have that header, but this is the container that describes them all. All right. And, all right, what kind of file is shared by many different programs? Those are the libraries, dynamic link libraries. The same file is shared by many programs, which is dangerous and unsanitary and the number one way malware gets execution on Windows machines, but it makes files smaller, it conserves RAM, and it makes them load faster. So that's what Windows does, and Linux does it too now. Even though it's risky, it is so valuable, they do it anyway. And we'll play a lot with stills in the projects. You'll be making malicious stills and taking over machines with them. So it's 3 IDK, root, I know who root is. And so, close this, and I'll stop this recording. We should take a break.